Yeah.
And so for those who are working so many hours and who are feeling busy, like what is it to take, to just bless what you're doing, to listen to it, to wonder about it. You're doing what you're doing because you have to. So become curious about yourself. Why are you doing these things? Where are you alive in it? Where do you feel happy? Where's the joy? Where do you feel the invitation from the Spirit?
Welcome to the Reintegrate podcast, where we discuss the joys and frustrations of trying to live an integrated Christian life. Your hosts are Brendan Romai and me, Bob Robinson. This podcast is part of a multifaceted ministry called Reintegrate, the Institute to Reintegrate Faith, Life, and Vocations. I'm the executive director, and what I do is help make whole life disciples in three particular spheres: with college students, with churches, and with marketplace leaders. Go to re-integrate.org, re-integrate.org, for all sorts of resources to help you, your congregation, or a group of like-minded people in your line of work to reintegrate. Our guests today are Tom Sine and Dwight Friesen, authors of a fresh off-the-presses book. The title is creative. We've heard of 2020 hindsight. Well, the title of this book is 2020's Foresight. Brendan will introduce our guests.
I sure hope that our listeners appreciate the incredible guests you've lined up for this podcast, Bob. Each episode, we try to bring on fascinating, nationally known thought leaders, and I believe that's the case again for this week. Our guests for this week are Tom Sine and Dwight Friesen, who have just co-written a new book titled 2020's Foresight: 3 Vital Practices for Thriving in a Decade of Accelerated Change. Tom Sine is what we might call a futurist. He is co-founder, along with his wife Christine, of Mustard Seed Associates. For 3 decades, he has consulted countless churches and organizations to help them forecast and innovate for the challenges of the future. They live in an intergenerational community in Seattle where they seek to model a new way of living for the 2020s called the Mustard Seed House. Dwight Friesen is a professor of practical theology at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. He has been a leading innovative church leader for years, which has led him to initiatives like Parish Collective, a global movement of Christians reimagining church in, with, and for the neighborhood, as well as the Inhabit Conference, a gathering of Christian leaders who share a common vision for seeing the transformation of church through their participation in their neighborhoods. Born and raised in Canada, he now lives in Washington State with his wife Lynette. Welcome to the show, Tom and Dwight.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Glad to be with you.
The subtitle for your book is intriguing, especially for myself and those who share my generation. I'm 23 years old right now. I was born in 97, so I'm kind of straddling Generation Y and Generation Z.
Okay.
So for this decade that's ahead for people like me, because obviously in our culture we're seeing a lot of change with politics and social values and technology. It's kind of, I think, an unprecedented pace with the speed that things are changing. And that's something that you say in your book, that it will be a decade of accelerated change.
I got together 50 Christian leaders in Seattle as the 07-09 recession was beginning. And I write about this in a Leadership Journal article. And I pointed out that back then and still today, every major corporation has a plan for the next recession. I've never found a single church or Christian parachurch ministry that does. And so we started getting ready at the beginning of the recession, and these 50 leaders created courses for their churches, courses in financial management to help people get their finances in order, courses in how to process food, because a lot of people didn't know that, and gardens were starting again. But what we didn't do was we didn't think about the impact of the recession on Gen Y, who were just launching like Gen Z is now. And they got hammered. And the research shows they're still behind economically every prior generation. They were staying in their parents' basement waiting for life to start. And when they went to college, the costs were significantly more than they had been in earlier generations. So when they graduated, they also had more school debt. Well, we're at another threshold time, and I urge church leaders everywhere to wake up to the challenges facing Gen Next, Gen Z, because they're in our high schools, they're heading to college, many of them have already started, and there are not going to be jobs there, particularly for the young people that don't go on to college, people from minority backgrounds, young people getting started. They're going to have it the roughest. And so this is an opportunity for imagination and creativity to create job opportunities for young people that want to be change makers. Many of Gen Z want to make a difference. And they really give a rip about issues of racial, economic, and environmental justice, and they want to work for change. So parachurch groups could create ministries for neighborhood improvement, like the kinds of thing the parish collectives do, and get these young people to work, maybe on a very modest income, but develop their job skills, and then help them translate back into the society after we get out of this dreadful pandemic economy we're in now, the pandemic recession.
2020, by almost every stretch, is just like a year for the crapper. It's a year for the history books, right? Like, it seems like every time you open the newspaper or turn on the news or open your feed, you're hearing yet another thing that's like, oh no, that's 2020, right? We're talking about this whole idea of the new normal and like, what is that? Well, part of the new normal is that in almost every sector of life, rapid change is the reality.
Yes.
And we weren't, actually the purpose of our book was not to anticipate or to predict, I should say. It wasn't to predict what all those changes that are coming our way. There's lots of books that do that. What our book was designed to do was to put tools into the hands of everyday people who are trying to reintegrate their own lives with their own spirituality, so that they don't have to be caught off guard by those changes. So they actually have tools that can help them anticipate what might be coming their way, that they can actually reflect in terms of what God's shalom might invite, and then to actually innovate so that they can have a way to respond or anticipate the kind of pain or suffering that might evolve from some of those changes that are coming our way.
Well, in the book, you present what you call a 3-step dance. Could you share with us, teach us how to dance in this episode of the podcast?
The three steps of anticipating, reflecting, and innovating, they really are a dance. There's a cyclical nature to them. It's not like you innovate once and you are and you've kind of got it done. What we're really talking about here is a 3-step dance process that's about deep listening and following the Spirit into faithful presence to what we're hearing.
Yes.
This is not an academic, simply sort of a research heavy kind of thing. It's simply asking questions. What's likely to happen?
Yes.
And then what's the invitation to join God in the midst of that?
So I'm going to name 3 groups of people. These are the 3 groups that this ministry, Reintegrate, focuses on. What should they be anticipating, and what should they do to make challenges into opportunities? The first, we've talked about some, but it's college students as they are getting their education and preparing for their careers. And the second is church leaders. And the third is, what would you say to those who are in the workplace? What should people be doing in their ordinary, everyday vocations?
We owe it to young people to realize that the cost of education right now is really crimping their schedule and their life ahead. But it also is essential that for the ongoing pandemic recession, that we start creating new options for them so they can launch. And particularly for those that are low income, to create new ministries where we put young people to work in ways to get their lives launched. But we're also going to have to look at alternatives to housing, because the American dream house, where you expect to have a place 20% nicer than your parents' house with closets as big as small bedrooms, that bird's not going to fly any longer. And so we, at many different levels, we need to help make young people aware of the challenges they're facing, but most importantly, create innovative ways to help them get started, in classes, in programs, in social enterprises, so they aren't just sitting waiting for life to happen.
I think for me, when I think of college students, more than like when I was a college student, I could, if I dreamt up an idea that I wanted to do in the world, I could just go and do that. I could get a degree, and it was almost guaranteed that I was going to be able to have that career. If I was a young person today, I would be really critically assessing and asking whether or not that's viable for me going forward. Whether higher education as it's been framed is my future. I think I would take a really good look at what my skills are and what I am passionate about, and how I could engage in a kind of entrepreneurial endeavor that would allow me to have a little more of a measure of control over my own income. The idea of the job as we've had it in the past, I'm not sure is going to be quite as viable, but all that to say, it goes back to this kind of anticipating question. How do I listen, not just to the external environment, but how do I also listen to who I am and what the desires of my heart are, and see where the connections are between what I see on the horizon as being likely or probable changes to the environment and where my skill sets are. I think we have an opportunity. Young people today have an amazing opportunity to innovate, but it's going to take some serious risk. And I think that I would be looking for a support network of older adults who believe in me and who are willing to stand with me and coach me as I take some bold steps into an unknown future.
And we need somehow, Bob and Brendan, to recover that sense of call, that you don't have to be a full-time pastor or missionary, but we do need laity, 20s, 30s, and 40-year-olds, who carve out time to not only be present to God daily, but present to neighbors weekly, because we're not going to have enough support through government services and church benefactor programs to address all of these needs. We need people to become active followers of Jesus in the 220s.
And I think in terms of church leaders, when I begin to think about that segment of your audience, like right now, COVID-19 has presented a really interesting opportunity for church leaders to listen to their neighborhood in a different kind of way, at a deeper level. In some ways, it's put a pause on our programs, as they have often been in many of our churches. And what's been interesting is that most people, especially the non-essential workers, we find they're walking their neighborhoods on a much more regular basis. They're actually in many cases more grounded in their place than they have been previously. And what part of what that means is that people are noticing your church buildings. This is a real.
What is that building? I didn't notice that one there before.
Seriously.
It's empty now.
And they are empty. And in many cases, folks are saying, like, what is this thing? And churches that are using this as an opportunity for deep listening are asking, in what ways can the building that we already own bless our neighbors? How can the physical structure that's here serve as a gift to where we are? So there's a sense in which simply walking your neighborhood and asking, how does our building and our people who are here serve to, or the fact that we are here serve as a blessing to our neighborhood? One of the things that I've done on a personal level is I drew up a map of my neighborhood, and I have it hanging in my wall. It's just over there, just over here. For those who are watching on camera, you can see it right there. It's just a loose drawing of my neighborhood. And when I first began, when COVID first hit, I began noticing in my neighborhood who was sick, what businesses were closing, how was my neighborhood changing as a result of the pandemic. Then as Black Lives Matter hit, I began to look for ways in which systemic oppression and systemic violence and arrests and marking those places on my neighborhood. I didn't yet know what I was to do, but all I was trying to do was to do a deep listening. What and how is my neighborhood changing? And creating a space in which I can begin to reflect. In what way might God be inviting me to be different in my neighborhood as a result of what I'm hearing in real time where I am?
And I just want to add to that Dwight and his two colleagues that wrote The New Parish created this movement called the Parish Collective. And one of the highlights of my year, every year, is when I go to the Inhabit conference and we hear people doing 15-minute summaries of the innovative ways that they are multi-level. Working for neighborhood change making is just breathtaking. It's breathtaking. And I'm just glad to be there. I'm not a part of it, but Dwight sure has been a part of that. And it's not just a national movement. Parish Collective is becoming a global movement. And so one of the things we need to do, we need to find new ways to help people not just do some charity in the neighborhood, but we need to do things that empower our neighbors. We need to start community gardens. We need to start social enterprise programs, particularly among those young people that are launching that aren't going to college, so that they can find ways to support themselves and care for their families. So there's a wonderful opportunity for imagination and innovation following in the footsteps of all the Parish Collective is doing.
There's people who are going to work 40, 50 hours a week, and what does that mission field look like? And how can people who are already gainfully employed and want to see their actual work be their mission, what can they be doing in this three-step dance?
He's talking about me. Unfortunately, I'm gainfully employed and I work 40 to 50 hours a week.
That's exactly right.
So this to me comes back to that core question. I mean, it's all, you're going to hear me repeat it again, but at the core of this is about listening. The three-step dance is not about assuming that we know what the mission is. And so in the midst of the busy work life, the being pulled in a million different directions, and for those who have kids in there or they're partnered, or, I mean, there's so many things vying for our attention. Part of the deep listening is to listen to our own lives. Yeah. And so for those who are working so many hours and who are feeling busy, like, what is it to take, to just bless what you're doing, to listen to it, to wonder about it? You're doing what you're doing because you have to. So become curious about yourself. Why are you doing these things? Where are you alive in it? Where do you feel happy? Where's the joy? Where do you feel the invitation from the Spirit? Do you have to do it all? This is one of the beautiful things about COVID. So many people are being forced to stay at home, and their patterns are being interrupted. And they're discovering that there are parts of that they actually like, that they're being forced to slow down. They didn't choose to. And it's inviting them to think differently about their patterns and their way of being. That's the invitation always. How do we listen to what the Spirit of God is saying to the ordinary stuff? You know, when lately I've been kind of obsessed thinking about Moses when he was in the wilderness, kind of in between that space when he'd left Pharaoh, after killing Pharaoh's servant, and before he was leading the people of Israel. God came to him as a shepherd. When Moses was a shepherd, God came to him and asked him a question, the simple question of what's in your hand. And of course, what was in Moses' hand was the shepherd staff. It was his everyday work life. It was a symbol of his job, if you will. And the invitation to God was to say, listen, that shepherd staff is your call. What's in your hand? What is it that you're already doing? And in what way is that an invitation to join the Spirit in the recreation of all things? And I think that's always the question to us, is what's in our hands? If you're a school teacher, if you're a stay-at-home parent, if you're a truck driver, the question is, what's in my hand? And how is that my invitation to join the change-making revolution that God's always been about?
Part of what Christine and I do as a way of listening is we go on retreats, prayer retreats 3 to 4 times a year. Now, people are too busy for most people to spend that kind of time, but once or twice a year to get some time away to listen afresh for God's call. How can I be the presence of Jesus in this work situation? And so there's opportunity. And so We need to listen to our context, not only the needs that people are dealing with today, but as we finally get a vaccine, we are going to need new imagination to go back into church buildings. And we're going to need new imagination of what those buildings need to be for. One of the things we talk about in the last chapter of the book is not only life-making and change-making, but church-making. And there's a church here in Seattle that represents a new model. It's a Methodist church plant called Mountain and Valley. It's in a primarily interracial African-American community. And essentially, they purchased a building right on Main Street, and they rented out as a co-housing space.
Co-working space.
Co-working space, thank you. Thank you for correcting that. Co-working space. And then it is also the art center for the neighborhood. People have gatherings there, and of course there's worship on Sunday. But what it does is it focuses the church more into the community than just under the tent for the people that gather. And so we're going to need to imagine new forms of church making that are really there for the whole community and not just for the people that show up once a week, or in these days, 2 to 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times a month, excuse me.
Are there any other issues that you think just cumulatively of things that we're not expecting Generation Z to face? Like, how can we be preparing them for that? You know, I'm blessed. I was taught in a time where I think I graduated at the perfect time to be employed and to kind of land on my feet. But for a lot of people, they don't get to, and they won't get to.
Well, Brendan, let me start with something that's very familiar to you, and that's your laptop. One of the things that's happened overnight that is a part of the accelerating change is the rapid movement into a new tech world. And there are tremendous gifts and possibilities. But one of the concerns that is being raised by some, and that's something I'm certainly concerned about, is the use of technology to shape our values, shape our kids' values, and formation happening less at church and more through all of the influence of technology and children's toys that talk to them and actually record some of the conversation that goes on in families so they can narrow cast, messages about things that you might want to buy. So we are facing, I think, a formation crisis in the next 5 to 10.
The tech revolution is, of course, is not just a formational piece. It also is a deeply, it's a justice piece. The algorithms that drive so many of our decision makings are not neutral. They are racially charged. They are driven by the dollar, right? But it's a new realm of social justice that we need to pay attention to. But again, I think what's really important for me to say is that although the book does look at a lot of the changes that will be coming our way over the course of the next decade, our goal was not to predict them all and to lay them all out. It's impossible. We can't know fully what's going to happen next year, and we'd be fools to say we could. What we do have in our tradition as followers of Christ is a deep tradition of learning to listen, of discerning together with others how to prepare ourselves, and then how to innovate so as to prepare so that we don't get caught off guard. And I think that for me is the key piece. Like, I don't fully know what tomorrow is going to happen, what tomorrow will invite, but I do know that somehow through whatever tomorrow brings, the invitation of God will be to be present, and will be to be to engage what comes my way in the spirit of the resurrected Christ. One of the things that I don't want to see happen, or I fear will happen, or one of the reasons why we even wrote this book, was that we don't want followers of Christ to be so overwhelmed by the changes that are coming our way and the rate of change that they live in fear, that they double down on xenophobia, that we become withdrawn, or we keep to ourselves. Rather, we were hoping that by giving some tools to anticipate what's coming our way and to reflect on it, that we might actually be able to innovate out of love, not out of fear. When we can actually anticipate and see that by doing this instead of that we're not cowering, I think we're in a better place to extend the love of God in the world.
We need to wrap it up because Dwight's on his way to class.
Dwight, it's been great to be with you again. And Bob and Brendan, delight to meet you guys. If your travels ever bring you to this side of the country, we still do hospitality out in our yard when the weather's good.
Oh, good.
We like to cook for people.
When it's not raining, is that what you're saying? It never rains in Seattle.
It never rains in Seattle. That's a myth that was started by some of my Hawaiian friends.
And hey, listen, we're really grateful for the work that you guys do at Reintegrate, and even what you're modeling between the two of you. I just pray blessing on you guys. I think what you're doing is awesome. So thank you.
Amen.
In the final third of our podcast, Brendan and I talk about the implications of what our guests spoke about.
The more and more I'm thinking about just the direction society's going into, the more I'm like, it's logical that we need to really live as Christians. We're going to really have to live differently than the direction society's going, Yeah.
And what's interesting is that we're having to deal with this, with an ever increasing consumeristic worldview.
Yeah.
That is shaping the minds and hearts of everybody, no matter what generation. We've been talking, we'll be talking about Y and Z generation, but it's like, and now algorithms that are made to make you want to buy something so that you can have an identity, right?
Yeah.
And I think my generation, we struggled with the American dream, the 3-bedroom home and white picket fence and 1.5 dogs. I don't know, something like that.
Something like that.
And so, but I think that your generation, what are you struggling with? The shaping of who you are based on your screens.
It's dystopian. It freaks me out. And
many screens.
And the data's there. The data is terrifying. The data on the effects of social media and mental health and adolescence. And it's like the generation is the current adolescent generation is being experimented on with mass media and technology,
by people that do not have their best interest at heart.
No. I mean, that's why I believe, like, from the bottom of my heart, and not that, I'm a sinner too, but like these tech giants, these guys like Mark Zuckerberg, he is a terrible person, not even in the, I'm not even saying like as a judge of his heart, but as a judge of what he allows to happen and he's complicit in. How can you knowingly do that with a clear conscience? How can you let that happen? Not that I expect perfection from anyone, but I mean, same thing with like these tech giant guys like Jeff Bezos. The dude. Amazon's a tough one because they put on a lot of facades of being progressive with like, oh, we'll pay for your college and paid maternity leave and this and that. But like in reality, like there are multiple reports of like workers dying of heat stroke in their warehouses, and they actively own a robotics company. Every single job in their company, they are always trying to automate. They're actively at any given moment researching how to get rid of everyone's job. And it's like, it's like kind of terrifying. You have these societal experiments happening right before our eyes. Like, well, what do you do then when there aren't any jobs for anyone? It freaks me out, man. This stuff was like when I was like 15 years ago as a kid, you'd be reading these dystopian novels and it'd be like, wow, neat. Screwed up way to live. There's like robots taking everyone's jobs, and thank goodness, and like as a kid, like my idea of a robot was like the Honda robot. Like, oh, look, it can walk around. It's neat, but now it's like, oh gosh, no, this thing's like can literally take your job. It's like right around the corner. It's freaky. I don't even. There's got to like I really think Christians are going to have to find like a really, really different way to live. I think you have to for people's like physical well-being. I think we're going to have to band together communally to even provide for people physically, but mentally and emotionally, absolutely as well.
Well, I think that's what, Tom and Dwight are talking about is are Christians going to have the 2020s foresight to be able to minister to people where they really will be in the 2020s, or are we just going to be doing church and living our lives as if it's the 1990s or something, right?
What Dwight and Tom were talking about, just it's making me think, how can I be more organic and more deliberate with, because I go to young adult group every week, and it's good. We go through scripture, we pray for each other, we chat, and that's.
But the question is, do you strategize? As a group of young adults, do you get together to read scripture and to pray and to care for one another? Or do you get together to listen to your world, listen to the scripture, and say, what are we going to do about it?
Oh, I don't think there's any strategy. I think people don't know how to approach it. I don't think it's for a lack of sincerity or desire,
No. Well, it's not. I don't think it's for a lack of sincerity or desire. I think it just hasn't been modeled.
Right. And
it's like you're in a 20-something Bible study, and it's like, oh, this is even better than youth group, which was all flash and no substance. But so we're, because we're actually adults now, we can think about the Bible a little bit deeper. But then there's no reason beyond our fellowship, which is a good reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there isn't a decision amongst us to help each other be change agents,
Yeah.
And change agents, not just simply by sharing the gospel of salvation to your coworker or your neighborhood friend, but transformation in such ways that you're like, what is it that needs to be done that helps and serves people so that they can tangibly see that Jesus cares? So they can tangibly understand that God has a different vision of life, and that the kingdom of God is actually a better way of life, so that they would want to dive into that life. But we have to have already made the splash into that life ourselves.
I don't feel like my faith is integrated the way it should be. Not that my faith isn't active. I invest a lot of my time in ministry. I record a podcast sometimes.
That's really important.
Probably the biggest one. Also the most profitable.
Did I tell you about our latest sponsor?
No, Sprite.
Because we don't have one. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I was hoping it was Sprite, but I'm involved with the young adults group. I lead a high school small group. I go to church every Sunday.
What we need is, why do I get up in the morning? What is it that drives my days? Because you'll get burnt out if you don't have an integrated understanding of what is driving your days, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm working over here, and is that integrated into what I'm overall called to do? And if it's not, I got to make some changes, right? Or if it isn't, maybe not changes as in quit the job, but changes in within the job itself, or quit the job. There's different changes that could go on. But how is that integrated into this bigger thing that I'm called into, in that I can live with a community of like-minded men and women my age that are excited about the same stuff, and we can encourage one another towards this grander vision of what God wants to do in the world, besides us going to work, collecting your paycheck, going to a Bible study, going to church, going to work, collecting your paycheck, going to Bible study.
Yeah. I mean, how do you do that? How do you bring people to life? How do you bring communities to life?
I mean, people need vision. They need to see a life that's better. They don't know, right? They're not doing anything different because they don't see something that could be better. And to listen. Dwight Friesen was saying listen a lot. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
It's like stop and listen. So, having a conversation and saying, but let's this time listen to each other's passions. Listen to what gets us cranked up and excited. Listen to each other's dreams of a future that is impactful to the people around us. And let's figure out ways to live into those dreams as a community, to encourage one another and not just say, you can do it, but actually figure out ways to make it happen.
It's convicting hearing from people who do have vision, because I know that I don't. I mean, like, I'm at a place where I know I'm not where I want to be. I know that the pattern of my life right now is tolerable. And there are good things. I'm blessed that I have what I need financially and a little bit more. I'm blessed that I have stability and routine, and I have a job that I don't completely hate, but I know that spiritually it's not enough for me long term. And maybe it's there and I'm just not looking for it. You know what I mean? Maybe I don't know how. And outside of my life, like I'm really grateful. I'm blessed with the privilege to be involved in ministry. And I really do cherish that. I love the fact that I get to be a high school leader, really, really do. I think that's such a cool thing. But I know that I am not doing for my boys what I could be. I just don't know what it is I could be doing more. I mean, I host them at my house every week, and I'm glad I get to. And we have good conversations. And I think there's a lot of value just in them being heard by people that are older than them that have been there. But there's got to be more.
Probably the biggest thing I heard from today's episode was listening to Dwight talk about listening. It's like, how can you best serve these high schoolers? Well, you need to draw them out and hear their exciting stories about who they want to be, help them actually figure out that, because most of them are just letting the stream push them wherever it's going. And it's like, who are you and where are you and what does God want you to do? This is the whole theology of vocation in a nutshell. Like, who has God made you and where are you situated and what is God calling you to do? Not in the future, right now. And you can't come up with that on your own. You have to listen to God. How do you listen to God? You have to be quiet and you have to ruminate. And you have to be in community with other spirit-filled believers who can help you process this. It's only in community that you can understand God's vision for your life, his calling on your life. People can say, this is what I see in you, Brendan. This is what I'm hearing you say. Is this what you're saying? And you're like, no, but yeah, let me figure this out. Let me say it this way. And they're like, oh, I'm hearing you say it that this is a thing that you could be doing in your work right now to make it more worthwhile. What can we as a community do to encourage and equip you to do that? Vocation is, what are you called to do right now? And what is this vision? What is this what Steve Garber, talked about telos, the end goal? What are you hoping to shoot for? How do you get there? And what are the things that you need to be doing now to get yourself to there?
I'm okay with with ending up where I didn't expect, as long as I know that was because I was following God.
Well, that's exactly
not
right.
Because I was being complacent.
That's exactly right. That is, you very doubtful that you'll end up where you hope to be.
Right.
If you won't end up where you hope to be if you're complacent, guaranteed. And you won't end up where you wanted to be if you're absolutely following God, because he's going to say, well, guess what? I want to go this way with you. And you're like, oh, I didn't see that. Right?
But I will end up where I want to be if I'm motivated yet selfish. That is the American dream.
That is a really good insight there, Brennan. That is exactly right. That's how we all think I've got to know exactly what I'm going to do, and I've got to make it happen in my own strength and in my own will. And come hell or high water, it's going to happen. No matter who I hurt or no matter what I do, that is going to happen.
When I get there, I will ignore the empty feeling. Because I am happy now. I made the dream work. No, we have such a dumb mindset as a culture. That's how we think, though. People make a career out of saying that crap, more or less. Like, we literally employ people called motivational speakers. It's like a pastor without God. They're like delivering sermons that. It's the same idea, though. It's insane. I don't know, Bob. I'm definitely thinking a lot about what I can do within the own structures that I'm a part of.
Right. It might be helpful to just get out a piece of paper and write down. Your roles. This is what think about roles. These are the roles I play. These are the roles I play at work. These are the roles I play in my family. These are the roles I play at church. These are the roles I play with friends. And look at those roles and say, do I like where those roles are? Do I like what they are accomplishing? What does it look like to be that friend, or to be that boyfriend, or to be that manager, or to be that family member, or to be that high school group leader? What are those? What is it supposed to be, and what is it? And let's dream a little bit.
Yeah.
And not just leave it to yourself to figure that out, to start having conversations with people that you live with in this. That's what Christian community is supposed to be. These are the people that you tell these things to, and they say, let me help.
Yeah.